A single flight can change a life. For Brenda Jenkins, a senior flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder, Flight SA-710 from New York to London was supposed to be just another transatlantic chore. She prided herself on her ability to size people up in an instant to sort the high-value passengers from the nobodies. But on this crisp autumn morning, her judgment would not only be wrong, it would be career-ending. In seat 12B sat the one passenger she should have never ever crossed, a woman whose quiet dignity masked an unbelievable power, a woman who didn't just fly with the airline she owned it. Dr. Lena Dubois settled into seat 12B, the window seat in the Economy Plus cabin. She adjusted the worn but comfortable scarf around her neck, its deep indigo fabric, a stark contrast to her simple grey turtleneck and black trousers. At 58, her hair was a distinguished salt and pepper pulled back into a neat, low bun. Her face etched with the fine lines of a life filled with both laughter and intense focus, held an air of quiet authority that was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. And today nobody was looking. To the bustling crew of Stellara Air Flight SA-710, she was just another passenger, an unremarkable black woman flying alone, probably on a budget. Perfect. That was exactly the point. 3 years ago, Lena had poured her life savings and the entirety of her late husband's legacy into acquiring a struggling regional airline. She had rebranded it, modernized the fleet, and christened it Stellara Air, with a mission statement centered on one core principle: dignity in the skies. She believed air travel had become a dehumanizing experience, and she was determined to change that one passenger at a time. But a company's mission statement was only as good as the people who embodied it. Lately, she'd been seeing a troubling uptick in customer complaints reports of dismissive attitudes, curt service, and a general lack of empathy, particularly on the lucrative transatlantic routes. Her chief operating officer, David Chen, had suggested sending in a team of secret shoppers. Lena had a better idea. She would be the secret shopper. No special treatment, no fawning executives. Just Lena Dubois passenger in 12B, observing her company from the inside out. The boarding process was chaotic. A flight attendant with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read, Brenda, stood near the galley, her arms crossed her expression, a mask of bored impatience. She barked orders at passengers struggling with their carry-ons. So that won't fit, you'll have to check it. Ma'am, move along, you're holding up the entire plane. There was no warmth, no offer of assistance, just clipped, irritated commands. Lena watched Brenda interact with a young family. The mother was trying to soothe a crying toddler, while the father wrestled a car seat into the bulkhead row. Brenda sighed dramatically, tapping her acrylic nails on the galley counter. Some people should really consider if their children are fit to fly, she muttered to her colleague, a younger, dark-haired attendant named Chloe. Chloe gave a nervous laugh, her eyes darting away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge her senior. Lena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was exactly the kind of rot she was afraid of. An attitude of entitlement and disdain for the very people who paid their salaries. When Lena's turn came to pass the galley, she offered a polite smile. Good morning. Brenda's eyes swept over Lena's simple attire, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second too long. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she turned to Chloe and said, loud enough for Lena to hear, Make sure you do a thorough check of the economy cabin for meal pre-orders. Sometimes their cards get declined. The implication was clear and laced with prejudice. It was a small jab, a microaggression designed to put Lena in her place. Lena felt the familiar sting, a dull ache she had known her whole life, but she let it pass. She was here to observe, not to react. Not yet. She found her seat and began her mental checklist. The seat upholstery was clean but a little frayed at the seams. The in-flight magazine was dog-eared. Small things, but they painted a picture. She was settling in when an elderly man, Mr. Peterson in the aisle seat, 12C, introduced himself with a kind smile. He was a retired history professor, excited to visit his grandchildren in London. They exchanged pleasantries, his warmth, a welcome contrast to the chilly reception from the crew. The final passengers boarded, and the cabin doors were secured. The lead purser, a man named Mark, with an overly practiced smile, made the welcome announcement. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were vacant. As he walked past, he made a point of greeting a man in a tailored suit across the aisle, by name offering him a pre-departure water. He didn't even glance at Lena or Mr. Peterson. Lena made a note in the small journal she carried in her purse. Crew hierarchy, clear deference to passengers in business attire, indifference to others. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the safety demonstration began. Brenda and Chloe stood in the aisle, their movements robotic and uninspired. Brenda caught Lena's eye for a moment, and a flicker of something annoyance, contempt crossed her face before she looked away. The flight had just begun, but Dr. Lena Dubois already had a very bad feeling. The problem at Stellara Air wasn't frayed upholstery. It was something much deeper, and its name was Brenda. The aircraft leveled out at its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, and the seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin crew began their first service, a dance of clattering carts and practiced movements. Lena observed everything. The way Brenda prioritized serving the man in the suit, leaning in with a conspiratorial smile. The way Chloe seemed to rush through her interactions, avoiding eye contact. The way Mark the purser spent most of his time chatting with a colleague in the galley, their laughter echoing into the quiet cabin. When the beverage cart reached their row, Chloe was the one serving them. She looked flustered, a stray strand of hair escaping her neat bun. "Something to drink?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll have a ginger ale, please," Mr. Peterson said kindly. "And for you?" Chloe asked, turning to Lena. "Just a water, no ice, please," Lena replied. Before Chloe could pour the water, Brenda appeared behind her, placing a hand on the cart. "Chloe, they need you up in the premium cabin to help with the wine service. I'll finish here." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes, when they landed on Lena, were cold. Chloe scurried away, looking relieved to escape. Brenda took over her movements, sharp and efficient. She poured Mr. Peterson's ginger ale. Then she turned to Lena. She picked up a plastic cup, filled it to the brim with ice from the bucket, and added a small splash of water. Lena looked at the cup. "I'm sorry I asked for no ice." Brenda paused, the plastic tongs still in her hand. She let out a long, theatrical sigh. "We're in the middle of a service for 200 people. You'll get what you're given." She plunked the cup down on Lena's tray table with a sharp crack. Some of the icy water sloshed over the side, pooling on the plastic. Mr. Peterson, who had heard the exchange, clearly frowned. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but polite. The lady made a simple request. "There's no need for that tone." Brenda straightened up, a look of utter disbelief on her face, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken to her. She fixed Mr. Peterson with a glare. "Sir, I'm the senior attendant on this flight. I think I know how to manage a beverage service. I'll ask you to stay out of it." She then turned her dismissive gaze back to Lena. "Is there anything else I can get for you? A coloring book, perhaps? Something to keep you occupied?" The insult was so brazen, so dripping with condescension, that a hush fell over the immediate rows. The man in the suit across the aisle snickered into his newspaper. A woman a row behind gasped softly. Lena felt a flush of cold anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down, compressing it into a hard, diamond-like resolve. She met Brenda's smug look with a calm, unblinking stare. No, Lena said, her voice steady and quiet. That will be all. Thank you. Brenda smirked, victorious, and pushed the cart down the aisle. Lena took a napkin and carefully wiped up the spilled water. Mr. Peterson leaned over his voice, low and full of concern. That was completely out of line. You should report her. Lena gave him a small, appreciative smile. Thank you for speaking up, Mr. Peterson. It means a lot. Don't you worry, I'm taking notes. An hour later, the meal service began. The options were chicken pasta or a vegetarian curry. When Mark the purser arrived at their row, he announced, "We're out of the chicken, only curry left." He delivered the news with an air of finality, not apology. Lena knew for a fact this wasn't true. Her airline's policy, a policy she herself had approved, was to stock at least 15% more of the most popular meal choice to avoid this very situation. She also knew that the man in the suit across the aisle who was served by Brenda just moments before was happily eating the chicken pasta. Brenda had clearly saved one for him, a small favor for a high-value passenger at the expense of those in the back. That's fine, Lena said pleasantly. The curry will be lovely. But when Mark handed her the tray, it slipped from his grasp, tipping sideways. A dollop of yellow curry sauce landed squarely on the sleeve of Lena's grey turtleneck. Oh, Mark grumbled as if it were Lena's fault. He made a cursory dab at her sleeve with a flimsy paper napkin, smearing the stain further. It'll wash out, he said dismissively before handing her the messy tray and moving on without another word of apology. Lena stared at the bright yellow stain now blooming on her cuff. It was no longer just about poor service. This was a pattern of targeted disrespect, enabled and participated in by the entire crew, led by their queen, B. Brenda. Lena looked up and saw Brenda watching from the galley, a thin, cruel smile playing on her lips. The battle lines had been drawn. Lena wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a target, and she knew that for things to change, this situation had to play out to its inevitable disastrous conclusion. For the next few hours, Lena Dubois became a ghost. The crew of Flight SA-710 perfected the art of looking through her. Her call button, which she pressed once to request more water to clean her sleeve, was ignored for 27 minutes. When Chloe finally arrived, she avoided eye contact, handed Lena a small bottle of water, and vanished before Lena could say a word. Lena didn't press the button again. Instead, she watched. She saw the crew congregating in the forward galley, their backs to the cabin, laughing and scrolling through their phones. She saw Brenda spend nearly 20 minutes chatting with the passenger in the suit, offering him a second miniature bottle of wine from the premium cabin. She noted the disregard for standard procedures service carts left unattended in the aisle, rubbish collected haphazardly. Each infraction, small on its own, contributed to a larger picture of systemic failure. This wasn't just one bad apple. The entire barrel was rotting. Mr. Peterson, bless his heart, tried to make up for the crew's negligence. He shared his own bottle of water with her and engaged her in a quiet conversation about European history, a welcome distraction. You know, he said, his voice low, I've been flying for over 50 years. I've seen service decline, of course. But I've never seen anything quite like this. It's a deliberate cruelty. Sometimes, Lena replied thoughtfully, choosing her words with care, people forget the service part of customer service. They see the uniform as a position of power, not responsibility. Her mind was already racing, formulating a plan. This couldn't be solved with a simple disciplinary report. This required a complete overhaul. She needed irrefutable proof, a clear chain of command failure that went all the way to the cockpit. An opportunity presented itself about 5 hours into the flight. The cabin lights were dimmed, and most passengers were asleep or watching movies. Lena noticed a woman in her late 20s, a few rows ahead, traveling with a lap infant. The baby had been fussy for some time, and the mother was doing her best to soothe him, pacing in the small space by the emergency exit. Brenda emerged from the galley, her face a thundercloud. "Mum, you need to sit down," she snapped. "You're disturbing the other passengers." The young mother looked exhausted and close to tears. "I'm sorry, he's just teething and won't settle. The motion of walking helps." "The aisle is not a playground," Brenda said coldly. "Control your child, or I'll have the captain issue a formal warning. It's a safety violation." The threat was absurd and completely unnecessary. The seatbelt sign was off. The mother, intimidated and humiliated, retreated to her seat where the baby's cries intensified. Lena's blood ran cold. This was no longer just about disrespect. It was about the abuse of authority. She discreetly took out her phone, opened a voice memo app, and placed it on her lap, shielded by her scarf. She waited. Half an hour later, as Chloe was passing by, Lena flagged her down. "Excuse me," she said softly. "That mother up there is having a very difficult time. I have some experience with children. Perhaps I could offer to hold the baby for a few minutes to give her a break." Chloe looked panicked. "Oh, I don't think Brenda would like that. It's not about what Brenda likes," Lena said, gently but firmly. "It's about showing a little human compassion. It's what our airline is supposed to be about, isn't it, just then?" Brenda reappeared. "Is there a problem here?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing at Lena. "No problem at all," Lena said calmly. "I was just suggesting to your colleague that we could offer some support to the distressed mother and child a few rows up." Brenda let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Well, you think you're part of the crew now? Let me be very clear. You are a passenger. You will stay in your seat and you will not interfere with the cabin. That is a direct order. If you get up again, I will have you restrained. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The recording on Lena's phone was still active, capturing every venomous word. "I understand you perfectly," Lena said, her voice betraying no emotion. Brenda gave her one last, withering look and stalked off. Lena now had what she needed. She had witnessed incompetence, prejudice, and a direct, baseless threat to a passenger. She had documented the purser's complicity and the junior attendant's fear-based inaction. The net was closing. She leaned her head back against the seat, the quiet hum of the Rolls-Royce engines a steady companion. She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to strategize. When they landed at Heathrow, the performance review of a lifetime was going to begin. As the flight began its initial descent into London, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The crew, who had spent hours ignoring the passengers, were suddenly all smiles and efficiency preparing for landing. They moved through the aisles, collecting blankets and trash, their faces transformed into masks of professional courtesy. It was a practiced charade, and for Lena, it was nauseating. Brenda, in a final act of performative service, walked through the cabin with a basket of wrapped hard candies. She offered them to everyone, her voice a syrupy sweet. "Thank you for flying Stellara Air." When she reached Lena's row, she paused. She looked from Mr. Peterson to Lena, and then deliberately skipped over her, offering the basket to the passenger in the seat behind her. It was such a petty, childish gesture, but it was the punctuation mark on a flight full of insults. It was meant to be the final word, a last reminder to Lena of her perceived insignificance. Mr. Peterson, who had seen the deliberate snub, was incandescent with rage. "That's it," he whispered fiercely to Lena. "The moment we land, I'm demanding to speak to the captain. This is the most unprofessional, disgraceful behavior I have ever witnessed." Lena placed a calming hand on his arm. "Mr. Peterson, your integrity does you credit. Thank you. But please allow me to handle this. I promise you it will be handled." His anger subsided into confusion, but he saw the unshakable certainty in her eyes and nodded, trusting her. The plane touched down smoothly at Heathrow Airport, taxiing towards its gate at Terminal 3. As the seatbelt sign was switched off, the familiar scramble began, passengers grabbing bags, switching on phones, eager to disembark. Lena remained perfectly still in her seat, a small island of calm in the chaotic cabin. Brenda and Mark stood at the exit, their farewell smiles plastered on. "Goodbye, thank you for flying with us," they chorused. As Lena's row began to file out, Brenda caught her eye. She gave Lena a smug, dismissive wink, a final silent, "I win." Lena didn't react. She let Mr. Peterson and several other passengers pass, and then she turned to the flight attendant call button above her head and pressed it. A moment later, a harried-looking Chloe appeared. "Yes, we're deplaning now. You need to please inform your purser, Mark, and senior attendant Brenda that I would like a word with them," Lena said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried an undeniable weight of command. "I will also require the captain and first officer to join us. We can use the forward galley. Please ask them not to disembark." Chloe stared at her, utterly bewildered. I can't do that. We have procedures." "I am aware of the procedures," Lena interrupted gently. "Now please go and deliver my message. Tell them passenger 12B insists." Something in Lena's tone, the lack of anger, the absolute certainty spooked the young attendant. She scurried away towards the front of the plane. Lena could hear the hushed, irritated conversation. "What passenger 12B? The one with the attitude," she heard Brenda hiss. "Tell her to file a complaint online like everyone else." "She's insisting," Chloe stammered. "She wants the pilots too." Mark let out an exasperated sigh. "Unbelievable. Fine. I'll deal with this." A minute later, Mark appeared at her seat, his fake smile gone, replaced with a mask of pure annoyance. "Ma'am, the flight is over. Whatever your issue is, you need to take it up with customer relations. My issue is with you, your crew, and the operational integrity of this flight," Lena said, still not raising her voice. "I will not be discussing it with customer relations. I will be discussing it with you, Brenda, Captain Evans, and his first officer. Now, in the galley. Or would you prefer to have this conversation on the jet bridge, where your ground crew and the arriving passengers can hear?" Mark's face paled. The sheer audacity and the calm authority with which she spoke were unnerving. This wasn't the typical disgruntled passenger. He exchanged a panicked look with Brenda, who was watching from the galley, her arms crossed, a defiant scowl on her face. Reluctantly, Mark nodded. "Fine, but make it quick." Lena stood up, smoothing down her turtleneck. The yellow curry stain on her sleeve was a stark reminder of the journey. She walked toward the front of the nearly empty aircraft, her simple shoes making almost no sound on the carpeted floor. The flight was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. The forward galley felt small and claustrophobic. Brenda stood with her arms crossed, radiating hostility. Mark fidgeted with his tie, trying to project an authority he clearly didn't feel. Chloe hovered near the back, looking like she wanted to be swallowed by a life vest compartment. A few moments later, the cockpit door opened and the two pilots emerged. Captain Evans, a veteran with silver hair and a weary expression, and his first officer, a younger man named Kenji, looked more confused than concerned. "What's all this?" Captain Evans asked, his voice gravelly. "Mark, we have a turnaround in 3 hours. What's so important it can't wait?" Mark gestured vaguely towards Lena. "This passenger captain has a complaint about the in-flight service and is refusing to disembark until she speaks with you." The captain sighed, turning his tired eyes to Lena. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my job is to fly the plane. Cabin service issues should be directed to the purser or the company's customer service portal. Brenda couldn't resist adding her own venomous barb. She's been a problem the entire flight, Captain. Demanding, disruptive. Frankly, I think she's just looking for a free flight voucher. Lena ignored them all. She reached into her handbag, but instead of pulling out a wallet or a pen, she retrieved her phone. Her thumb moved purposefully across the screen. She selected a number from her favorites and lifted the phone to her ear. The crew exchanged bewildered looks. Was she calling the police? Her lawyer. The call connected on the first ring. "David, it's Lena," she said, her voice calm and clear. The use of the first name, spoken with such casual authority, sent a tiny ripple of unease through the galley. "I've just landed at Heathrow, flight SA 710. I need you to do a few things for me immediately." She paused, listening. The pilots were now watching her with dawning curiosity. First, Lena continued, her eyes sweeping over the faces of the crew. "I want you to issue a grounding order for the entire cabin and cockpit crew of this flight, effective immediately. No one is to be rostered for another flight until my investigation is complete." Captain Evans's jaw dropped. "A grounding order? Who the hell do you think you are?" he blustered. Brenda laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "She's delusional, absolutely nuts." Lena held up a single finger, silencing them without raising her voice as she continued her call. "Second, I need you to contact Heathrow ground operations. Have them meet me at the gate. I need a secure conference room for 6 people, plus 2 representatives from our corporate HR department and the head of UK airport operations, Mr. Davies. Tell him it's a Code Sierra." At the mention of Code Sierra, an internal designation for a critical owner-level incident, Mark's face went from pale to ghostly white. He had heard rumors of that code, but never seen it used. It was a corporate doomsday button. Third, Lena said, her gaze now locking onto Brenda's Have airport security. Meet the crew at the jet bridge. They are to be escorted to the conference room. Confiscate their airline IDs and access cards. They are not to communicate with anyone until I arrive. She listened for another moment. "Excellent. I'll see you there in 15 minutes." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. The silence in the galley was absolute, thick with dread and confusion. What was that Captain Evans finally managed to ask, his voice shaky. "What kind of stunt are you trying to pull?" Brenda stepped forward, her face twisted in a sneer. "You can make all the fake phone calls you want, lady. You have no authority here. Now get off my plane before I have you removed for trespassing." Lena looked at her, and for the first time since the flight began, she allowed a sliver of the immense power she held to show in her eyes. The quiet passenger was gone, replaced by something far more formidable. "Your plane, Ms. Jenkins?" Lena asked, her voice dangerously soft. "That's where you are mistaken." She turned to the captain. "Captain Evans, my name is Dr. Lena Dubois, and 3 years ago I purchased this airline. Every bolt in this aircraft, every seat, every uniform you wear, it's all mine. So to answer your earlier question of who the hell I am, I'm your boss. And as of 90 seconds ago, you and your entire crew are officially grounded pending termination." The color drained from Brenda's face. The sneer dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of horror. Mark stumbled back against the galley counter, looking like he was going to be sick. Chloe began to tremble, her eyes wide with terror. The 2 pilots stared at her, their minds scrambling to process the impossible. Dr. Dubois. They knew the name, of course. The reclusive, brilliant owner who had saved the company from bankruptcy. They had only ever seen her in official corporate photos, a powerful woman in a sharp business suit. They never imagined she would be the quiet, plainly dressed passenger in seat 12B. The reality of the situation crashed down on them with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just neglected a passenger. They had insulted, threatened, and humiliated the owner of the entire airline. The walk from the aircraft to the designated conference room was a silent, suffocating journey through the cold, anonymous heart of the airport. The familiar bustling sounds of the passenger terminal were replaced by the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant whine of machinery. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. For the crew of Flight SA-1110, it was a walk of shame, each step echoing with the finality of a career plummeting back to earth. Brenda Jenkins walked with a rigid posture, a desperate attempt to maintain a shred of her former authority. But inside her mind was a maelstrom of denial and terror. "This can't be happening," she thought, the phrase repeating like a broken mantra. "She's a liar. A crazy woman who somehow knows the right names to drop. This is a bluff, a massive, insane bluff." But with every professional nod from the security officers, with every door they unlocked, with a grim swipe of a keycard, the reality became colder and harder. She thought of her mortgage, of the seniority she had lorded over junior attendants for 2 decades. She saw the smug, dismissive wink she'd given the woman in 12B, and a wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't the wink of a victor, she now realized, but the foolish grin of someone goading a lioness. Beside her, Mark Thompson stared at his own feet, unable to look at anyone. Regret was a physical poison in his veins. He had seen Brenda's cruelty for years, tolerated it, even enabled it with his silence and weak smiles. He wasn't a monster like her, he told himself, but that was a feeble defense. He had stood by a silent accomplice because it was easier than confronting her. He had let her set the tone for his cabin, and now he was being dragged down with her. He risked a glance at her stony profile and felt a surge of resentment. It was her fault, her arrogance, her prejudice. But the rational part of his brain knew better. He was the purser. The failure was his too. Captain Evans and his first officer Kenji walked with the stiff bearing of men facing a firing squad. The captain's mind, accustomed to checklists and emergency procedures, was frantically searching for a protocol to handle this. But there was none. A command failure. That's what the report would say. He had remained sealed in his cockpit, a sterile bubble of instruments and procedure, completely disconnected from the human drama unfolding in the cabin he was ultimately responsible for. He had trusted his purser, and his purser had failed him. He imagined the review board, the cold, disappointed eyes of his peers. A career spanning 30 years, thousands of safe landings, all of it about to be undone by a cup of water and a curry stain. Chloe Rossi, the youngest, felt the smallest and most transparent of them all. She was drowning in shame. Every moment she had stood by, silently, every nervous laugh at Brenda's cruel jokes, every time she had avoided eye contact with the kind-faced woman in 12B, it all replayed in her mind in excruciating detail. She had been afraid of Brenda, but now she was terrified of the consequences of that fear. She had wanted a career in the skies to see the world. Now she wasn't sure if she'd ever set foot on a plane again without feeling the crushing weight of this single catastrophic flight. They were led into a conference room that was the physical embodiment of sterility. Grey walls, a long, polished black table, and chairs that seemed designed for maximum discomfort. Waiting for them were 3 figures who stood as they entered David Chen, the COO. His face, an unreadable mask of corporate steel. A woman with sharp features and colder eyes who could only be from human resources. And Ian Davies, the head of UK operations, a man they all knew by reputation, and whose grave expression confirmed their worst fears. They were motioned to sit on one side of the table, a row of defendants awaiting their judge. The silence was absolute. David Chen didn't speak. The HR woman simply stared, her gaze cataloguing their every nervous twitch. The crew, once a team, were now isolated islands of misery. They didn't look at each other. They were strangers, bound only by a shared impending doom. The door opened, and Dr. Lena Dubois walked in. The transformation was breathtaking. The quiet, unremarkable passenger was gone. In her place stood a titan of industry. She had taken a moment to pull her hair back into a tighter, more severe bun. And though she wore the same simple clothes, she wore them like armor. Her demeanor was calm, her posture radiated power, and her eyes held a clarity that was more intimidating than any rage. She sat at the head of the table flanked by her COO, and placed her small journal on the polished surface. The curry stain on her sleeve was the only remaining artifact of her time, as passenger 12B, a silent, damning exhibit for the prosecution. "Good afternoon," she began. Her voice was perfectly modulated, carrying across the room with no effort, yet it made them all flinch. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Lena Dubois, and for the past 8 hours I have had the distinct displeasure of experiencing firsthand the culture of negligence you have fostered aboard my aircraft." She opened the journal, its small pages filled with neat, precise script. "We will go in order of transgression, Ms. Jenkins." Lena's eyes, dark and piercing, found Brenda's. "Your conduct was not merely unprofessional, it was malicious. Your comment at boarding regarding the credit cards of economy passengers, timed perfectly as I walked past, was a clear and targeted racial microaggression. A direct violation of company policy and, frankly, of basic human decency." Brenda paled, a strangled noise escaping her throat. "Your performative sigh when I made a simple beverage request. Your condescending and frankly bizarre offer of a coloring book. You didn't just deny a request, you sought to humiliate. You weaponized your position against a passenger you deemed beneath you. Was this an isolated incident, Ms. Jenkins, or is this how you treat anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of a valuable customer?" Lena didn't wait for an answer. She turned to the purser. "Mr. Thompson, you stood by and witnessed this overt hostility. Your silence was your endorsement. Later, when you spilled a meal on my clothing, your apology was non-existent. Your concern was for your schedule, not for the passenger you had inconvenienced. You then lied about the availability of a meal choice to give preferential service to a passenger you deemed more important. As the purser, you set the standard for the cabin. The standard you set was one of callous indifference and petty favoritism. You failed your crew, you failed the passengers, and you failed this company." Mark sank lower in his chair, his face blotchy and red. Lena's gaze then moved to the end of the table to the pilots. "Captain Evans, a pilot's first responsibility is safety, and their second is command. You succeeded in the first. You failed catastrophically in the second. Your cabin was a toxic environment ruled by a bully and enabled by a coward. Your failure to leave the cockpit to engage with your crew to maintain oversight of the service and welfare of your passengers created a vacuum of leadership. In that vacuum, this poison was allowed to flourish. You were the commander of that vessel, in name only. Your crew was out of control, and you were either oblivious or indifferent. I'm not sure which is worse." The captain, a man of immense pride, visibly deflated the word, striking him with the force of a physical blow. Finally, her gaze softened, but only slightly as it fell upon Chloe. "Ms. Rossi, I saw your discomfort. I know you were intimidated. But you must understand that in the face of blatant injustice, fear is an explanation, not an excuse. You had options. A discreet word with the purser. A note passed to the cockpit. a call to the company ethics line upon landing. You chose none of them. Every time you looked away, you cast a vote for Brenda's cruelty. Your silence was your endorsement. I hope you learn from this that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. She paused, letting the weight of her individual indictments fill the room. She then brought her hands together on the table. My late husband and I founded this airline on a single guiding principle: dignity in the skies. It was our promise, not just to the passengers in first class, but to every single person who entrusts their safety and their money to us. It is the soul of this company. Today you collectively took that soul and you trampled on it. She looked from face to face, her voice now turning to solid ice. This is not about a personal grudge. This is about a brand I have spent years building, and a promise I will not allow to be broken. You are the custodians of that brand while in uniform, and you have proven yourselves to be utterly unworthy of that trust. She looked at David Chen, who gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod. Effective immediately, your employment with Stellara Air is terminated. All of you. Your final paychecks will be processed and mailed. Security will escort you from the premises. I would strongly advise against using Stellara Air as a professional reference. She stood up her movement, signaling the absolute, irreversible end of the proceedings. Furthermore, a full report of this incident, including my audio recording of Ms. Jenkins's direct threats to a passenger, will be filed with the relevant civil aviation authorities for a full review of your professional certifications. We are done here. Without a backward glance, Dr. Lena Dubois turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the shattered remnants of 5 careers and a silence that screamed louder than any argument ever could. The moment Dr. Lena Dubois exited the conference room, the fragile composure of the terminated crew shattered completely. The HR director, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who had been a silent assessing presence, slid a neat stack of papers across the table. Standard termination agreements and non-disclosure forms, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Sign them. A security officer will then escort you individually to retrieve your personal effects from your lockers, after which you will be escorted from the property. The finality was brutal. There was no negotiation, no appeal. Brenda stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language, her hands trembling too violently to hold a pen. Captain Evans, his face a mask of grey shock, signed his name with a rigid, jerky motion, the last official act of a 30-year career. Mark Thompson was openly weeping, his shoulders shaking as he scribbled an illegible signature. Chloe, her own tears blurring her vision, signed quickly, a desperate urge to simply escape the room, overwhelming everything else. One by one they were led out, walking past other Stellara employees, whose curious glances quickly turned to knowing, pitying stares. The whispers had already begun. The legend of Flight SA-710 was being born in the hallways of Heathrow, before its crew had even left the building. The news of the mass firing of full cabin and cockpit crew, including a senior captain, was an unprecedented event that sent a seismic shock through the entire airline industry. For Brenda Jenkins, the consequences were a slow, agonizing descent into irrelevance. Initially, she was defiant, convinced her 2 decades of experience would land her a position at a rival carrier within weeks. She applied to British Airways, to Virgin Atlantic, to Lufthansa, her cover letters filled with confident prose about her expertise in premium cabin service. The rejections were swift and coldly polite. The aviation world was smaller than she knew, and a Code Sierra incident at Stellara, linked to a full crew termination, was a black mark no recruiter would ignore. Her desperation grew. She applied to budget airlines, charter companies, any entity with wings. In one humiliating video interview, the recruiter asked point blank, "There is a note on your file from the Civil Aviation Authority regarding a passenger complaint and an internal investigation. Can you elaborate on that?" Brenda stammered, lied, and the call was politely ended minutes later. The recording Lena had mentioned was a ghost she couldn't escape. Stripped of the uniform that had been her armor and her identity for so long, she found herself powerless. The authority she had wielded at 35,000 feet was meaningless on the ground. 6 months later, her savings dwindling, she took a job at a high-end department store in the handbag section. She spent her days folding dust bags and placating irritable customers, her own face now a permanent mask of bored impatience, not as a choice, but as the weary expression of a defeated woman. The karmic irony was lost on her, buried under a mountain of bitterness. Mark Thompson and the pilots fared no better. Mark's complicity and failure of leadership made him unemployable as a purser. He left aviation, taking a mid-level management job at a hotel chain where the ghosts of his past wouldn't follow him. Captain Evans, to avoid a full revocation of his license, accepted the findings of the review board and the severe formal reprimand for command negligence. He found work eventually flying overnight cargo routes across the Atlantic, a lonely, humbling penance. He flew in silence, the cabin behind him, filled with pallets of inanimate freight instead of passengers he had failed. Chloe Rossi, however, chose a different path. A week after the firing, consumed by guilt, she sat down and wrote a 4-page handwritten letter to Dr. Dubois' corporate office with no real expectation it would ever be read. She didn't make excuses or beg for her job back. Instead, she took ownership. She detailed the culture of fear Brenda had cultivated, but then condemned her own moral cowardice for succumbing to it. "I failed you, Dr. Dubois," she wrote. "But more importantly, I failed the person I thought I was. I became a bystander to cruelty, and for that I am truly sorry." To her astonishment, she received a reply 2 weeks later. Lena, who read the letter herself, saw not a liability, but a teachable moment. She saw genuine remorse and the potential for growth. Chloe was offered a 3-month probationary contract in a ground role at Stellara's London Operations Centre, on the strict condition that she complete an intensive corporate ethics and leadership course at the company's expense. It was a lifeline. Chloe accepted immediately, working with a humility and dedication that impressed her new superiors. Her story became a quiet internal symbol of the airline's new chapter. It wasn't just about punishing the guilty, but about lifting up those who were willing to learn from their gravest mistakes. The incident on Flight SA-710 became the catalyst for Lena's masterstroke, Project Dignity. She addressed the entire global workforce in a live-streamed town hall. She never mentioned the flight number or the names of the crew, but everyone knew. She spoke of the incident as a painful but necessary discovery of a cancer within our culture. She laid out a new, non-negotiable vision. The old training modules were scrapped. In their place, a new state-of-the-art empathy and resilience program was designed by behavioral psychologists. Employees were put through hyper-realistic simulations, learning to de-escalate conflict, recognize unconscious bias, and manage the human stress of travel with compassion. The Secret Skies program was launched, empowering employees from all departments, from finance to engineering, to take flights as anonymous passengers and provide direct, unfiltered feedback to the executive level, ensuring the view from 12B would never be ignored again. For Mr. Peterson, the kind history professor, the story had a far happier ending. A sleek black box arrived at his home via courier. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a card made of brushed steel, engraved with his name and a short message for showing decency when it was needed most. The skies are yours. It was a Stellara Air Infinity card, granting him and his wife complimentary first-class travel on any flight anywhere in the world for the rest of their lives. He was stunned, humbled, and deeply moved. 9 months later, Dr. Lena Dubois was on a flight from London to Tokyo this time, in a first-class suite reviewing quarterly reports. A young flight attendant approached her. "Dr. Dubois, I'm so sorry to interrupt." "Not at all," Lena said, looking up with a smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," the young woman continued, her voice earnest. "I started with Stellara a year ago, and in the beginning, it was tough. There was a weird culture. But everything changed this year. We all heard the stories about what happened on one of the transatlantic flights. It was like a reset button was hit for the whole company. Now we feel proud to be here. You made us remember that our job isn't just about serving drinks. It's about taking care of people." Lena's smile widened. She looked past the attendant down the aisle of the quiet, calm cabin. She saw another crew member kneeling to speak to an elderly passenger, listening with patient intensity. She saw a purser sharing a light-hearted joke with a family. She saw professionalism infused with warmth. The air was filled not with tension and resentment, but with a palpable sense of shared purpose. The journey had started with a bitter taste of prejudice and disrespect. It had cost 5 people their careers and forced her to confront the ugly reality of her own company's failings. But as she looked out the window at the vast sunlit expanse of the sky, she knew it had all been worth it. The soul of her airline, once tarnished, was shining brightly once more. She had demanded dignity in her skies, and in doing so had created a new dawn for Stellara Air. That flight changed everything, not just for a disgraced crew, but for an entire airline. Dr. Lena Dubois proved that one person's quiet resolve can move mountains, or in this case, a fleet of aircraft. It's a powerful reminder that the person you dismiss today could be the one who holds your future in their hands tomorrow. True power isn't about a fancy uniform or a title. It's about integrity, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're the one sitting in seat 12B. Karma, like gravity, has a way of bringing everyone back down to earth eventually. What did you think of Brenda's downfall? Was the firing of the entire crew justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that karma served justice on Flight SA-10 and want to see more stories of accountability and unexpected twists, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.